This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
It has officially been 1 week. I've followed doctor's orders. I've taken precautionary measures to ensure that my nasal passages get back to normal. I think we're in the clear. I've narrowly avoided surgery. Not that I ever figured I was going to need it anyway. Once the doc drained all that pus from my right nostril a couple weeks back, I knew the bulk of the issue was resolved right then and there. And it really was a simple process all along. All I had to do was stick a needle up there and drain it. Could have done it myself. Well, maybe not. Sorry for the TMI, but if you've listened to any of the podcasts I've done in the last couple weeks, it was probably very frustrating to sit through watching those shows with me sounding like Chucky Finster the whole way through. Trust me, I get it. It was hard enough to listen to me during the editing. If only you knew. Anything to avoid surgery, though. Not that I'm radically opposed to it. I just would prefer not having to pay medical bills. Let's just say my health insurance isn't accepted in a lot of situations, partially because it's not real health insurance. Of course, stupid me, thinking, nah, I don't need to pay for all that crap. Health insurance. I'm healthy. I take care of myself. I don't have a family history of medical issues. Why would I need to pay massive premiums for what's already a broken healthcare system in this country anyway? Of course, I was saying that when I was 21. I'm sitting here in my mid-30s saying the exact same thing. Nothing's changed. Just like my outlook on a lot of modern wrestling. Luckily, we're only here to talk about Classic Raw. And I know it sounds like I'm overly enthused to review this week's episode of Retro Raw. I'm really not. There was nothing on that show worth writing home about. But it's part of the process as we're going through these classic WWF shows and seeing how far we can manage to get through with this Raw library. And if you are checking out the show for the first time, welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Here on Mondays and Fridays on YouTube and Rumble to bring you a boatload of fun wrestling talk about classic territory footage, some modern WWE sprinkled in here and there. Try to make it worth your while. So make sure you subscribe, comment, like the show if you have not already. I talk about it all the time, but I appreciate the support from new and returning fans that come back to check out the show. You guys are the driving force that keeps the channel going. It's a small group of people that watch what I do, but I'm always grateful for the fans that enjoy coming back to hear me gripe and moan about wrestling. And there's plenty to gripe and moan about with this week's Retro Raw, so let's dive in. You know what I'm starting to recognize with these Raw shows? Beyond the fact that the show sucks, it used to be that the shows were terrible, borderline unwatchable, and filled with suck. Now they're just mainly boring. Which, as I've said a few times before, that's bad because at least when the shows were insufferably abysmal, I could find ways to entertain myself by laughing at the stupidity. Now I can barely even do that. Now the shows are so mind-numbingly dull. It's the equivalent to watching paint dry for 45 minutes. I mean, the only insufferable segments now are these billionaire Ted skits, which I've about tapped out on even trying to pay attention to. They used to be harmless little pre-tapes that didn't overstay their welcome. Now they're these drawn-out 30-minute sitcoms. Like we're watching an episode of Full House or Family Matters. And as bad as those shows were back in the day, at least there were momentary glimpses of good non-Caucasian dad comedy. Plus the acting was better. There's nothing remotely good about these billionaire Ted skits. They are bottom of the barrel drizzling shits. So we open this week with a tag match they set up during the main event of last week. It's Yokozuna and Davey Boy going up against two dudes with attitudes. And I tell you right now, that literally took every fiber of my being to say without gagging. Two dudes with attitudes. The lamest fucking tag team name since Pretty Deadly. And we're not too far off from seeing Shawn dress like those crop top cretins. So, Yoko and Davey versus Diesel and Shawn Michaels. Now, remember during last week's main event with Yoko and Shawn, they had fleetingly teased a breakup angle with Camp Cornette. But when everyone turned their attention to Shawn, Diesel ran out to save his partner in crime. I also could have used the phrase butt buddy, but I don't want to be entirely crude. Although I did note that little reach around ass tap that Shawn gave Diesel right before the bell. Now, naturally, because of everything they've been teasing with the Camp Cornette guys not being able to get on the same page, well, you knew exactly what to look for as this match kept going. The evident miscue spot from the heels. Overall, the match was okay. As fun as it is to rip on Shawn, you can't really argue that he was the workhorse of the four guys involved here. Diesel was his usual lazy self. Davey Boy tried, but I mean, he wasn't an athlete like Shawn was. And Yoko was... he was Yoko. He got blowed up less than 5 minutes into the match. They worked over Shawn after Bulldog had pulled the rope down and cut him off. And Shawn's a good babyface in peril, so he sold well for the big guys. At one point during the heat in this match, Davey Boy randomly did a frontward handspring and landed on his feet. And it was literally so he could mock the crowd and poke fun at Shawn. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there like, Christ, that's the most athletic thing I've ever seen Davey Boy do. How the hell did he pull that off? Then I think a couple years down the road when he goes to WCW and suffers that horrible back injury that basically ruined his career. And I'm like, yeah, he wasn't pulling shit off like that by the late 90s. I also liked, right before Shawn gave the hot tag to Diesel, Davey Boy's stomping the apron and trying to wheel Yokozuna to make the tag. And of course, he's hitting the mat 3 times with his foot. So what does the crowd chant? Not HBK. Not Let's Go Shawn. They're chanting USA. Because of course, they're foreigners. And this is back during a period where if you weren't American, damn it, you were a bad guy. So, of course, just to be a dick, Shawn can't just take a leap of faith and reach out to tag Diesel regularly. He has to climb on top of Yoko's back, ride him like a surfboard for a few seconds, and then he reaches out to tag in Diesel. I was like, you fucking pompous prick. If I were Yoko in that situation, I'd have slapped that boy's mouth and beat the fuck out of him. Absolutely uncalled for. And then Diesel made a short comeback, if you can even call it that. He threw some sloppy punches at the heels and whiffed Yoko with a big boot. Although I can't even really blame Nash for that. Yoko was just tired and barely able to stand by this point. And of course, after they knock Bulldog out of the ring, Shawn hits Yokozuna with a super kick, and he takes a bump out to the floor. And because Yoko's, fat.
He's fat!
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, because he's fat, he's unable to get back to his feet in time to break the 10 count, despite having Owen and Davey try to help him up. So Shawn and Diesel win by count out. I also forgot to note the miscue spot while I was rambling there. You basically had Davey Boy accidentally hitting a leg drop on Yoko after Shawn had gotten a visual pin on him. So it led to the afterbirth where we see Jim Cornette going off on Yoko and blaming him for the loss. I am verbatim quoting Vince McMahon on this one. Don't even give me a hard time. According to Vince, JC was, quote, verbally raping Yokozuna. Again, I watched it back just to make sure I heard that correctly. That is precisely what Vince called it. So after this verbal rapage, after Cornette had poked the bear for far too long, well, we finally see Yoko snap, and he shoves Corny down and starts unloading on him. And Davey and Owen try to pull him back, but Yoko basically turns into Godzilla and starts pounding his chest like Ape Man. And that's enough to run everybody out of the ring and up the ramp. Which admittedly I did find funny. I presume this counts as a Yokozuna face turn. It also implies his split from Camp Cornette. So, with Owen wrestling Shawn at In Your House, I guess that means we'll have Bulldog versus Yoko. Not really sure what to make of that. I mean, I've obviously seen that match at some point in my life, having bought the pay-per-view. Doesn't really bring back any spontaneous memories at the moment, so maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounds on paper. But that was the opener. It was pay-per-view hype of some description. Then we came back for Hakushi versus the 1-2-3 Kid. Hey, guess who's still not over after 2 years? Hakushi. Just saying. They had a very athletically impressive TV match that nobody cared about. In other words, your average TV match on AEW Dynamite. Lawler was eerily giddy over the idea of seeing Razor dressed like a baby. And I don't mean giddy in the sense of, oh, it'll be great to see this babyface humiliated because I'm a heel and I want to see the good guy get embarrassed. It was almost on par with him fantasizing about the visual of Razor in a diaper with a bottle in his mouth. Like he was watching a specific genre of porn. It was very uncomfortable. So, aside from the fact that nobody gave a fuck about the match, it also went way too long. Who decided it would be a good idea to give Hakushi versus the Kid 8 minutes plus commercial? And it's not to say it was a horrible match or anything, but you have a guy here that's about to wrestle one of your top babyfaces in a gimmick match for the February pay-per-view, and he's out there going 50-50 with a prelim guy that hasn't done anything remotely interesting since the Bret Hart feud last year. And I know some of y'all may have liked Hakushi back in the day. I don't give a fuck. I always thought the guy sucked. It was boring. And he's bounced back and forth between being a face and a heel. Never mattered to me. He just bored the living daylights out of me every time I watched him. That stupid face paint and his jiu-jitsu garbage. I don't care how many flip dives or springboard drop kicks the guy could pull off. Guy was blander than a piece of cardboard. So after these guys had a way too competitive match that overstayed its welcome, the Kid eventually won with a butterfly suplex off the top rope. And that was it. The Kid won his match, and it was immediately, let's go to a taped vignette with Jim Cornette and Clarence Mason. And I do have to admit, the more I watch of Clarence Mason, the more he starts to get over with me. I didn't appreciate all the legal jargon when I was a kid, but now that I'm older, it's the kind of humor that's just goofy enough to work in a pro wrestling context, but at the same time not completely insult my intelligence as a fan. And it's also great because he's standing next to Jim Cornette, of all people. The guy whose entire gimmick was that he was a loudmouth, fast-talking, snobby heel that just wrecked you with his verbal jousting. Meanwhile, he's just standing next to Clarence the whole time, nodding his head and making these over-exaggerated facials at the camera in agreement. Clarence is talking about how it's been 1 week since they filed the injunction on the WWF to reinstate Vader due to an improper suspension. It is a case that Clarence personally went to the Supreme Court to get approved. Gorilla Monsoon was acting in bad faith when he usurped his power to unfairly suspend Vader. And the longer this little pre-tape went, and Clarence got to the point where he just started repeating himself mid-sentence about the actions they would take to win their case, the more I was like, this guy is turning into Foghorn Leghorn before my very eyes. Unless we have immediate reinstatement, I say immediate reinstatement of Vader. We will sue, I say we will sue the WWF for every penny until we get justice. He really was a walking cartoon character. So in other words, they want Vader reinstated. We also got a health update on Mr. Monsoon. It's been a few weeks since the Vader attack. And there are just a few trivial injuries that Monsoon sustained. Just a simple hairline fracture of the transverse process of the third cervical vertebrae and some torn intercostal cartilage. But nothing that won't heal over time. Whew. Thank God. I was certainly worried about that fracture of the transvestite process and the third lower lumbar system of the circulatory system. I mean, we all know how bad those injuries can get. He also took a minute to apologize to the fans for acting in bad faith, not serving as a proper general manager. When he provoked Vader, he was doing so through the lens of acting as Gorilla Monsoon, not the president of the WWF. Now, he won't issue an apology to Vader personally, but he is sorry for the fans, or he is sorry to the fans for stepping out of line. He also talked about the decision to hand over the reins of the company to Roddy Piper in his absence, basically saying that he and Monsoon are good friends going back years. He trusts him. And he thinks the company will be in good hands under Piper's management until Monsoon comes back. He is a very, very bold prognosticator. It'll be fine with Piper in charge. What's the worst that could possibly happen? Piper's always been a straight shooter. I think Monsoon forgot to mention the other injury he sustained during that Vader attack. A massive throbbing concussion. And that led to the main event of this week's program. It is a Royal Rumble rematch between Bret Hart and The Undertaker for the WWF title. Only this time, there will not be any direct interference from Diesel. This will be Bret's chance to prove whether or not Taker really was the better man. And we know Diesel won't interfere because well, we just assume so. There's no substantial proof that Diesel won't get involved. We're just going out on a limb and hoping he doesn't. Because these people are smart. Well, I'll go ahead and spoil it. Guess who interfered in the match? And because they didn't bother to set up any ramifications had Diesel decided to get involved, you can't really blame the guy for taking advantage of stupid booking. So Taker's finally wrestling without the Phantom mask. That's the extent to where the positive feedback ends. I mean, the match was aight. It was a little better than the pay-per-view match. I mean, at least it didn't consist of Bret working over Taker's leg for an hour and a half. I mean, they had about 12 minutes to work with here, and that was a much better window of time to work with than 25. But again, like as soon as Diesel sauntered out and went over to the commentary booth, you're just sitting there like, all right, so when's the ref bump coming? And boy, you can only imagine how riveting Kevin Nash commentary was. It was about as soothing as listening to an NPR interview. I think I might prefer NPR over Nash. At one point, he talked about the weather in hell. He said it was minus 70. I shit you not. That was actual verbiage that Nash spouted from his lip hole. Meanwhile, Bret and Taker just having a match. There's nothing wrong with it, but it was almost a carbon copy of stuff they did for the Rumble pay-per-view. Bret working over Taker's knee. Taker getting in a couple hope spots and near falls on Bret. And once they do the deal where Taker went to scoop up Bret for a tombstone, but Bret's feet clipped the official, this was where the bullshittery began. It was funny too, because we've seen like how many countless ref bumps throughout wrestling over the years. I'm convinced that Bret's feet were either made of cement or steel. Because when he hit the ref with his feet, this official was essentially rendered dead. There's a 3 to 4 minute period where after he goes down, Diesel's out there beating up both Bret and Taker by himself. And it's not like the beating was urgent. Nash is literally moving at a glacial pace while he's going off on these two guys. First, he runs Bret into the ring post. Then Taker throws him into the ring steps. Then Diesel comes back with a chair and blasts Taker from behind. Then he throws him into the ring and hits Taker with 2 jackknife power bombs with multiple poses in between. Then he goes back out to the floor and teases another attack on Bret before leaving. All of this activity went on for at least 3 to 4 minutes. This ref did not budge. He was out. And, well, after they had Nash beat up the world champion and the previous number 2 contender, they go to break. And when they come back, they show Bret running after Diesel in the aisleway, supposedly chasing him to the locker room. And the match just ends. It is ruled, I think Vince said it was a draw. A draw, you say? Well, it's funny you mention that because right before they cut to break, Taker was seen laying flat on his back in the middle of the ring after Nash had powerbombed him twice. How the fuck did this match end in a draw if Bret had chased after Diesel to the back? Where did Taker go? Did he follow both guys to the back? Did he just vanish into thin air? We don't know. There was no replay. There was no follow-up. Everybody just fucking walked out. Or as Jim Cornette would famously say, they fought off. So this was, how you say, idiotic booking. Although, you know what? I'm actually going to give him credit for once. After last week where they had Diesel selling that match with Davey Boy for 10 excruciating minutes, at least they made up for it this week by having him come out and wreck shop on everybody. It just makes me laugh, though. In Seg 1, they have Diesel out there working as a babyface in a tag match with a guy who they're positioning as the soon-to-be number one face of the company at WrestleMania. Fast forward to the main event. He's just back to being a heel. I think. I have posed this question since Survivor Series last year. I will continue to reassert the same question because I'm yet to receive a valid answer. What the fuck is Diesel's character? Is he a babyface or a heel? Can someone please explain to me what the hell is going on? And don't give me any of this 50 Shades of Grey tweener nonsense. There's no such thing as a tweener in wrestling, and there never has been. That's a made-up term by marks that watched wrestling from the late 90s onward. As a fan who's trying to objectively follow this product in real time and make sense of everything going on, I genuinely do not understand what I'm supposed to think of Diesel in kayfabe. At the same time, he's friends with the fan-favorite good guy who's about to win the WWF title at WrestleMania. He's also acting like a dick by fucking over two of the other top babyfaces. This is awful psychology. And I don't know. Maybe I'm too old school when it comes to the dynamics of good guys and bad guys in wrestling. I understand there have been certain guys over the years that toe the line and don't necessarily fall into one specific category. But you can't even compare this to a Stone Cold Steve Austin type gimmick. The badass that just beats up everybody and doesn't give a fuck. Because at least when you follow Austin's timeline, he was a clear-cut heel early on. And then over time, once the fans grew to love the gimmick and gained an appreciation for the anti-authority stuff, that's when Austin became a full-fledged, undeniable babyface. There was no 50 Shades of Grey there. Even when Austin would stun the babyfaces. This Diesel booking is nothing like beer-drinking badass Steve Austin. Not even in the same stratosphere. This is just standard clique business. Diesel's out there being a mark for himself and running roughshod over Vince. Doing whatever the fuck he wants because he knows he'll get away with it. It's terrible. Terrible. You have no idea how happy I was when Taker beat Nash in Mania. People often reflect back on the streak and talk about the guys that Vince considered ending it before Brock did a decade or so back. If I would have bet money at the time, I would have been sure that Diesel was going over Taker at WrestleMania 12. Thank God sanity prevailed. You know where sanity didn't prevail? It was this billionaire Ted skit that ended the show. I seriously thought we were going to get away with not having to see these chumps on camera this week. How silly of me to hope for such a thing. And so you're all probably wondering, well, what was the brunt of the joke this week? As Vince was taking his obligatory shots at Ted Turner and WCW. It was actually an extension of the press conference they aired last week. This week, however, Ted was getting hammered with questions about all the millions of dollars WCW's wasted over the years, and how he's pissed off his stockholders as they've seen the numbers trickle downward. To which I simply wrote, boy, you should see those numbers by the end of the year 2000. You thought WCW wasted a shit ton of money in the early to mid-90s? Dude. You ain't seen nothing until you look at those financial records at the turn of the century. Now, I don't remember the numbers offhand, but I think it was somewhere in the ballpark of them losing $60 million in just the year 2000 alone. I have the book on my shelf in the other room, but I have to go back and reread that chapter of Death at WCW by Brian Alvarez. But I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in the mid-8 figures. And then, of course, the fake Ted talks about being motivated by greed, power, and money. So that validates his claim about spending money and getting zero return on investment. Whew. If only they knew what was ahead. Oh, by the way, since we're talking about figures and numbers, Raw lost again to Nitro in the ratings this week. It was a closer race this time, but Nitro scored a 2.9 to Raw's 2.7. So, definitely better than last week when Raw got absolutely creamed. And this show was a much bigger improvement over the snooze fest that was last week. But it's like I said at the beginning, man. The shows aren't even irredeemably bad like the majority of 1995 was. Now they're just lame duck 45-minute episodes with some mediocre wrestling matches spliced in. On paper, the show should have been pretty good. But the tag match was a one-man working machine. The Akushi Kid match went way too long and was way too unnecessarily competitive. And Taker and Bret was mid. A slight improvement over the Rumble match, but not by much. And it's not boding well for everything post-Mania, because we know what happens when Shawn wins the belt. Bret goes away and business immediately tanks with Shawn on top. Then Hall and Nash eventually jump ship to WCW. Kickstarted the NWO, which did massive business for them over the next 18 or so months. Until they fucked it up with the Hogan-Sting feud. Like, I know people often get caught up in thinking about how great Shawn was as a performer, but he was a disaster for business. And as we'll see throughout the year, he was a pretty lousy world champion too. Didn't bring much to the table aside from the occasional good match here and there. But none of it mattered when you looked across the pond at the other station and you see the massive business that Nitro was doing through the remainder of 96 and all of 97. I witnessed it all, man. firsthand. Whatever stories you've heard about Shawn over the years as the top guy in the WWF, remove all the stuff about the work rate. Guy was a ratings disaster as the top world champion for this company. And all it did was expose him even more as people started to see through the bullshit company propaganda. And all that energy Vince spent trying to force that boyhood dream nonsense down people's throats. Post-Mania 96 was when people saw the real Shawn Michaels. And boy, did they get fed up with it real quick. Story for another time, as the old saying goes. But on that note, we'll wrap it up there. Short and sweet one this week, and ain't nothing wrong with that. So, I think we got 2 more weeks until the In Your House pay-per-view. So we'll at least have 1 more episode of Salvation, and then we'll see what the offerings are for that In Your House 6. It's funny because I actually already reviewed that pay-per-view a few years ago on this channel, but contextually we weren't talking about the Raws and the lead-up, so I'll probably end up doing a second review. It might not be as long, but we'll see. I mean, I don't even know how many people have gone back and checked out that first review we did of it. Like I said, it's been a couple years. So, stay posted for that. And we'll keep monitoring more of the WWE content as we move forward. But I don't think the Elimination Chamber is until like March, right? It's still several weeks out. But on that note, appreciate everybody for tuning into the episode, and we'll catch you all Friday for more classic coverage. Take care. Peace out.